Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today, The Data Difference, Unlock Rich Scientific and Clinical Content Sources with AI. Our speakers today are Jane Reed, Director of Life Sciences, and Hal Evans, Director of NLP Insights Hub at IQVIA. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive the recording 24 hours after the event. We will also be running a Q&A session at the end if we have the time, so please do submit any questions you have in the Q&A box, which should be on the left of your screen. At the bottom of your screen, you will also see resources for more information on the topic of this webinar. And now we will start. Over to you, Jane.
Wonderful, thanks very much. So thanks, Melanie. So Howell and I are going to be talking today about the data difference and how you can unlock rich scientific and clinical content sources with our natural language processing and AI technology. So just a quick overview. We're going to be doing a little bit of an introduction, giving you an overview of where we see from our pharma biotech clients what the challenge is for getting value from text. And that's right across bench to bedside, right from discovery all the way through to drugs in the clinic. Then we're talking about some of the way that we can assist with tackling that challenge. So we're going to be talking about the library that we have, our cloud content, making it really accessible for any of our clients to access really key data sources, and how natural language processing really helps us make better use of that content. We've got some case studies and some demonstrations, particularly from some of those content sources, including the FDA drug labels, clinicaltrials.gov, patents and literature. And as Melanie said, if you have any questions, we'd love to address these at the end. Please use the webinar Q&A form. But first of all, we'd like a quick survey. So as you can see, we've put up a poll to find out whether you're using any NLP in your current work. So this might be anywhere within your projects, within your teams, within your organization. Are you using it at all, or potentially considering projects but not yet started? Are you actively looking at vendors and tools? So you're not yet using it, but you are actively out there and considering vendors. Could it be that you're regularly using it with an internal technology, or regularly using natural language processing with an external vendor technology? So I can see that some of the people are voting, so that's great. We're going to wait another couple of moments. So again, thinking about whether you're using machine learning, NLP, or rules-based NLP, any of the different sort of flavors of natural language processing or text and data mining within your current work to get better value to a variety of content sources. So we'll wait a little moment. I can see that we've got nearly 50% of the folk submitted. So that's great. So let's go on and see what the results provide. So that's interesting. You can see that out of the group sitting around the table here, about 40% aren't using NLP at all, either not at all or just thinking about projects. There's about 20% that are starting to look, and then let's think that's nearly 40% are actually using natural language processing either with internal technologies or with external technologies. So that's really interesting. That shows that this use of AI, ML technologies is really starting to grow within pharma and biotech.
Thanks, Jane. So I think we wanted to start off with a couple of quotes to bring the topic to life. And the first one is, we spend more time shoveling coal than steering the ship. We want to shift our energy to looking at the data and navigating where we are going. And we really like this quote because I think it really captures the sentiment of a lot of our customers and the people we talk to when thinking about unstructured and structured data sources. There is an awful lot of time and effort required to do things like data engineering, to do data sourcing and data partnerships, and prepare data so that it is analysis or research ready. And if you can short circuit that time spent on the data itself and move some of that energy into analysis, into synthesis, into answering questions, making decisions, then the value you're getting is much, much higher. And so some of the things we'll talk about today are about how do we get access to that data and get going with the analysis more quickly so that we can add value rather than spend our time on the data itself. And the second quote is, talented data scientists leverage data that everybody sees. Visionary data scientists leverage data that nobody sees. And I think this one is about really thinking about the value of data more deeply. What are we not able to immediately get? What is not structured, perhaps? Or what is buried within messier or noisier data and needs to be normalized and cleaned in order for us to realize the true value there? And I think that as data scientists, as well as other citizen analysts and others, look to answer questions, they really want to be able to answer them as fully as possible and add value in doing so. And so finding those nuggets of information, going that extra mile with data can be very, very important. And so again, we'll talk today a bit about how do we access the right data sources and unlock them so that we can get at that deeper insight.
So, I mean, when you think about the journey of a particular a molecule from discovery through development, through delivery into the population, and then really understanding the real world use of that particular molecule, there are key questions all the way around this bench to bedside cycle. And in essence, the questions can range from discovery, trying to understand targets involved in bone cancer, who is competing with you within patenting, or who's patenting a particular technology, maybe around a particular indication. You might want to look at the safety risks of drugs, understand better clinical trial analytics, think about real world. And for all of these different questions, you should be able to find a lot of the information is in unstructured text, but the value is locked away because of the difficulty in accessing the key facts in all these different sorts of sources if you're left with just manual processing. So when you're thinking of again, that first question, what targets involved in bone cancer, obviously you can probably envisage you or your teams going away, doing a search in Google Scholar, in Medline, in PubMed, and so forth. And in that search, you'll be able to find a lot of information. But in the search, you pull back documents that you then have to read, and that's just a slow process. But there is, around this circle, you can think about the sort of public sources you might want to search in order to get information to shed light and provide answers to these questions.
And when we think about answering this broad set of questions, our conclusion and the answer that we've come up with is to build what we call the on-demand content store. And this is essentially a way to pull in data from large-scale external sources and make that data available, but also make it efficient and quick to text mine using natural language processing techniques. So here on the screen, you'll see a summary of the key components of our on-demand content store. Just as an example here, some volumes. We have nearly 400,000 clinicaltrials.gov records. We have around 4 million PubMed Central full text articles, over 33 million Medline records. And these really give us the ability not only to get coverage across these sources by taking the full source, but also by indexing them, which is the process that we put this data through. That indexing essentially allows us to very rapidly apply natural language processing. So later on in the webinar, you'll hear some case studies and see a demonstration of some of these data sources being used. But we are very conscious that some use cases require very specialist information, and so some of these data sources might contain a very kind of small subset that is required for a particular analysis. Other sources, or even the same sources, may be used then for things like data landscaping where users want to get a sense of trends in research and in a variety of topics, trends over time. This content library is continuously being added to. So each one of these data sources is updated normally on a weekly basis to make sure that all the processes and analyses that we run from these sources are up to date. And we're also continuously adding new sources to the content store. You'll see that some of the sources are highly pertinent to the last 2 years and the coronavirus situation. So we have CCC and Elsevier and other COVID sources that are brought in, and also made more prominent of late are the preprint servers, so bioRxiv and medRxiv data. We also are able to bring those into the content store, giving users the ability to look forward in time, as it were, and see what new research may be coming down the line even before peer review process is complete. All these data sources are ready to go, so they are live, and we're able to immediately query and extract information from them. And this talks to that time to value that I mentioned at the beginning with the quotes, that really being able to reduce the time you spend on data engineering and data sourcing allows you to focus on analysis and synthesis. And so all of these sources are ready to go. And for sources that aren't here, we're able to either index and add new sources from external sources to this list, either on a general basis for multiple users to use, or for specific projects. And we're also able to create private areas for our customers where they can put proprietary data safely for text mining and NLP as well. And by having the data all in the same kind of environment, we're able to also do federated NLP, where we apply the same NLP, the same topic analyses, etc., to multiple sources in order to get a more complete picture of what's going on.
So, as Hal's pointing out, it's really critical to be able to access all of the different sources, because one data source might not give you the answers you need. But going back to the points we were making at the start, you also need technology to really provide a way of getting value from that unstructured text. So natural language processing can transform unstructured text into structured information, or something that can then be used to drive analytics and outcomes. So in this simple schematic, we can see the story of the data journey. So on the left-hand side, we've got the content sources, the ones that, for example, that Hal outlined a moment ago, which we know from a couple of decades of working with pharma and biotech, are the key content sources that can help our customers answer the questions around that bench-to-bedside cycle. We have a toolbox that can help us then delve into that unstructured text and structure the facts you need. And the next slide has a little bit more detail. But the core one is really the natural language processing. That's that computational linguistics that understands the structure of a sentence, the grammar of a sentence, and then you can use that to pull out the key facts. And that uses ontologies and statistics and machine learning and chemistry and so forth. But what we can do also is that can be used. That's obviously not the end goal. The end goal is to be able to provide that ready-to-use decision support data. And that can then be used to drive analytics and outcomes. And we'll be showing you in the demos today one type of way that you can push that data into what we call an insights hub. So very easy visualizations, good search portals to enable end users to really access the content. But obviously it can be used to feed machine learning pipelines, and the data really can be used anywhere within your environment to answer the questions you need. So a little bit more about that toolbox, that set of components that enables us to build queries that will find whatever the data it is that you need. So starting off with the heart, the linguistic processing. So we used a combination of machine learning and rules-based linguistics. And what that means is that we can break down text. So at a very simple level, you can understand, the computer can understand where a sentence starts and stops, what are the nouns and what are the verbs. So then you can see the relationships and differentiate, for example, between a compound causing a disease and a compound treating a disease. But we can also do the part of speech tagging and the stemming and the lemmatization, and really start looking at the context. So, for example, you can also make sure that you can use the grammar of a sentence and know whether something causes something or something does not cause. So that negation, you can capture that context. So that's really critical, and that's really what, in many ways, what differentiates using an AI technology such as NLP from simple keyword search. But also we have terminologies and ontologies. Now, these are the big dictionaries. So these means that you're not just searching for one keyword or a string of keywords. You're searching for concepts and all the synonyms. So again, if we think about that, question we were phrasing, how do I find all the targets for a brain cancer? You want to be able to say, okay, I need all the different synonyms for brain cancer, but maybe all the different types of brain cancer. And so using ontologies with a hierarchy enables you to really find the right terms you want to use and gives you really good recall. And then within the toolbox, we can do things like correct for spelling mistakes, correct for OCR errors. And we can also build ontologies for using the software or import your own internal dictionaries for use. The software also handles quantitative and pattern-based data. So where a dictionary won't work, for example, for dates or for mutations or for dosages, we can provide what we call pattern-based ontologies to make sure, again, we can find all the right information and standardize it. So that last one, the one I've just mentioned, the results normalization. So making sure you can not just find any gene mutation, for example, but normalize it to one particular label, one particular primary term, means that you can then start doing in essence, doing reasoning over that because you've captured all the different ways something is described and standardize that to one form. So that enables you to organize your output in a structured way. We can find chemistry, and one of the use cases refers to this, not just by name, but by substructure and similarity. And we also have a unique capability to really delve into embedded tables and document regions, which gives you really powerful recall for tables embedded in documents and precision for specific regions of a document. How?
So Jane has talked to the NLP components that allow us to make the best use of these different data sources. Here's a really detailed example of some of those different components being used. So in this example, the word nimesulide has been identified within the text. And because that keyword is part of our ontologies, we can associate a chemical structure to that name. We can also find COX2 from within the text, and we can look that up within the ontogene hierarchy and assign that the appropriate ID. And so those are two concepts, those are two entities that we find within the free text. But the key part then is that we also can find the relationship between the two. So we have these two entities, and the relationship between the two is derived from the inhibitor term. So we now know that nimesulide inhibits gene 5743. And so this really kind of gets down to the detail of being able to extract entities and concepts and relationships from within the text, creating essentially a structured record that describes this scenario from what would otherwise have required someone to read through and derive this manually. And so we can run this logic across thousands and hundreds of thousands of documents in order to look for these relationships, look for these entities, and pull out data for analysis and for search. So we've talked about the concept of finding the right data. We've looked at some specific data sources, and then we've described some of the tools and technologies through AI, through NLP, that allow us to get value from that data. And so coming back to the concept of where we can answer questions using this data, here's a broad range of use cases that we commonly apply these techniques and these data sets to. And these range from disease mapping and targets at ID and selection in the pre-discovery and drug discovery phases, through to a wide variety of safety and toxicity type use cases through the clinical development stages. In real-world evidence, recently we've been looking at categorizing different forms of real-world studies as an example. We're also able to deal with research information, not only in terms of its scientific content, but in terms of its contributors and authorship. So we can do different forms of KOL identification, for example, and identify things like study centers. Further down the chain, then looking at that post-marketing and approval stages, we have use cases in things like market access and competitive intelligence. And of course, a ever more prominent source of unstructured text are things like social media, things like patient forums, and digital information that comes from a variety of different digital interactions, things like MSL interactions with physicians, for example. It may be patients discussing their illnesses and diseases with other patients on specialized forums, for example. So all of these different use cases have different types of data associated with them, and we can use NLP to really get value and understand that data more easily. From a content perspective, many of those use cases can be serviced and answered using data from the on-demand content store. So let's now take a closer look at one of those sources.
So I wanted to just showcase what we have as one of the content sources, which is the FDA drug labels. This comes from the National Library of Medicine's Daily Med database. And it gives a label for each of the drugs submitted to the FDA and in use within the US. So as Hal pointed out when we gave the overview, there's over nearly 150,000 labels for prescription and non-prescription drugs. And you can see on the right-hand side that this each of these labels contains a really rich information around any one drug. So you've got the indications and the usage, the dosage, warnings, adverse events, and so forth. You've got information about clinical pharmacology, safety and toxicology. So it's a very rich set of information, very much focused around safety and efficacy and population studies of each drug. So if we think about a particular use case, one of the things that our clients really value from being able to look at regulate labels is to understand how they can develop labels themselves, or understand the best way to phrase particular statements in labels, or use labels for a source of sort of competitive intelligence, and see how other pharma companies are talking about their own particular drugs. If you've ever used the Daily Med website, it has some level of search, but it's very hard to really find the sort of level of detail that you really need. So this slide shows a couple of examples, synthesized examples of the sort of thing that our customers want to be able to do to find information over drug labels. So you can see trying to look for information around how a superiority trial is included in a label, or examples of allergic drugs discussing fatigue as a patient-reported outcome. So you can see these are quite complex questions that a simple search would find hard to tackle. So what we can provide for, in this particular use case, we provide for one of our clients an insights hub, which Hal will show us in a moment, which provides really highly searchable access to FDA drug labels, also some French drug labels, German drug labels, and enables the end user to very simply search for product name, for medical terms, for safety concepts, for indications, and get the metadata that they also need, so category, company name, and so forth. And this really saves, for this particular client, the equivalent of 9 FTEs worth of manual work to enable this strategic labeling analysis to be done on a daily or weekly basis. So I'm now going to hand over to Hal to give a brief demo of the sort of thing that we can build on top of the content sources that we can provide.
Thanks, Jane. I'm just going to share my screen. So what Jane has been describing within that case study, and apologies, I'm just going to find the right screen here. Can everyone see my screen? Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So as Jane described, we want to be able to get maximum value from the FDA drug labels database. And one of the ways that we do this is by putting NLP processes into the hands of users through a search portal. So in this case, we have a portal, so it looks like a traditional search portal. You'll see some key differences. If I start typing a drug name here, I get a suggestion for tocilizumab. And if I look across here at the little I can see that tocilizumab is not just a term or a piece of text, but it is actually an entity which represents all these different synonyms for Actemra, the drug, and its various different ways that that is described within documents. So if I select this, and I'm running it on the entire FDA drug labels database, what I'll now get is the power of one of those components that Jane talked to on a previous slide, which is our ontologies. And so this lets us quickly sift through the very large database and get the results we need. Now, obviously, that's just more like a keyword, although it does use ontologies, of course. But we can have some further precision by looking at the region of the document. So we've mapped all the different regions of the documents so that we can pinpoint specific parts of the document. So if I now switch to only search for tocilizumab within the product name, I'm able to then pinpoint and go down to one result. And this is the one result that I might be looking for, which is the label itself. If the other part of the tool is the smart query, and so beyond building out my own query using the various tools available to me within the concept search, the other option is that I can make use of NLP work and tuned queries that others have built by selecting from a predefined set of searches. So here we have a variety of options. If I choose find two terms, I get some parameters that I can choose from. So I may have been looking for a very specific label initially. What I'm now going to be looking for is a little more broad. So I'm looking for some monoclonal antibody labels. So I may start typing monoclonal antibodies. Again, the search is going to look for an ontology for me. I can see this one here is one that I need. And then within diseases and disorders, I might be looking for rheumatoid arthritis. And again, I have a suggestion here, and I'm going to select this one, which has got what I need in it. And finally, rather than use an ontology, I'm now going to use some free text. And so I'm going to choose pregnant women. And so the net has been cast a little wider, still taking advantage of some of the ontologies that we have. And if I refresh to get the whole result set, you can see here that I found 24 labels that talk to monoclonal antibodies with mention of rheumatoid arthritis and a specific patient cohort. Now, as I look through the results, I can switch between the document view, which gives me a snippet of the label as well as the title, or I can switch to the results table, which gives me the structured fields that the NLP has now derived from the data. If I switch back to the document list, I can click through to the DailyMed record for that particular label that I might be interested in. Or I can click on some of the text within the results. So let's say I'm looking at rheumatoid arthritis. I can click through to a version of that label information. and that version will be a different copy that's been marked up to show where the different terms and terminologies have been found within the record, and why that result has been returned. So because we're on a bandwidth for the webinar, I'll return to that in a second. So as you can see, we are able to get value from the FDA drug labels in multiple ways, by building our own searches or by taking advantage of pre-built searches. And we're also able to filter quickly the information further in a live way, using the chart on the left-hand side to perhaps zoom in on the specifics of the result set to really get something that I want. And now maybe I'm happy with these two results, and I can export them to Excel as well. As you can tell from the speed of the results, we're able to very quickly run these searches over and over again, using the indexed version of the data set. I'll now hand back to Jane.
Thanks very much. So I hope you can see my slides again, and we're now going to talk through another content which, again, many of our pharma biotech clients found hugely valuable, and that's clinicaltrials.gov. You're probably all familiar with the clinicaltrials.gov database. It's a key public pipeline database, again, provided by the National Institute of Health. It's a US provided database, but as you can see from the pie chart, only about a third of the clinical trials are US, and there's a huge, nearly half that are actually global trials, so non-US. So it's a really broad coverage of clinical trials from across the globe, covering all therapies, all indications. And you can see here that it's listing nearly 400,000 clinical trials at the moment. So again, there is a search portal on clinicaltrials.gov, but as we move to one of our case studies, I think you'll be able to see that, again, natural language processing can really bring a benefit. So this is from a webinar presented by one of our customers, Lilly, and it's one particular use case for getting better value from clinicaltrials.gov and clinical trial reports, to really start being able to understand statistics around, in this case, oncology and diabetes, to help with understanding of the competitive landscape around these two diseases, who's planning trials, what trials are ongoing, but also think about trial design, focus on ongoing research, trial planning, and so forth. So they used natural language processing to look specifically here for things like outcome metrics. So to understand across those two key disease areas, oncology and diabetes, what outcome metrics were being used for different trials, and particularly what were the outcomes that were being reported. So you can see in the little schematic little diagram on the right that we've got a couple of trials that are phase 2 trial. You can see that we've been able to structure and extract information on the clinical trial title, on the survival time with a number. There's 3.1, 5.07, and then more information in that table, much like what Hal was just showing in the demo. So Lilly was able to show that using natural language processing across all, I think at the time it was more like 300,000 clinical trials, they're able to reduce costs and time and errors, pulling out these data, enabling their clinical statisticians to access the information, again, through a portal, a search portal, as Hal's demonstrated, to enable really easy end-user access. And you can see the quote down at the bottom from Eric Su, who, and if you'd like more information, we can share the webinar with you. But it's showing that pipeline databases such as clinicaltrials.gov doesn't give the same value without informatics, i.e. without using an AI technology such as NLP. You can't easily query the unstructured text or use ontologies. It provides data that would take 10 or 100 times longer with tedious manual work. So I think really that's a really nice use case, showing the sort of value you can get if you're using these technologies over these these technology-enabled content sources. So Hal, back to you.
Thanks, Jane. So we've looked at FDA drug labels. Now let's take a look at clinicaltrials.gov. I'll share my screen once again. So here we have, once again, the Insights Hub. And previously you saw the search portal, and we'll come back to that in a second. But the other half of the solution uses dashboards and visualizations. So here we take, on a batch basis, information from clinicaltrials.gov, from the index. We run our NLP over it, and from that process, we extract information about trials related to, in this case, a basket of COVID-related treatment drugs. And we look at their things like recruitment status, we look at their location, in this case, which state in the US. We also look at start dates on a timeline, and then we're able to cut that information by the different dimensions available. The approach getting value from some of these sources is to design workflows of visualizations, of different charts, of different tables, to answer a particular question. So none of this is prescriptive. We can change the design, the layout, and the content of all of this right from the NLP and the data extraction stage through to any derived variables that we have from the data, and then push it into the visualization tool so that we can then bring it to life and put it in front of a variety of users. And we can also do things like let the users filter the data in different ways. And I just want to quickly look back at the previous demo now that it's loaded. So this was a cached version of the data. And here we have a copy of the underlying data source with the highlighting and markups to really help the user find where the key terms that they're interested are turning up in the document. If we now look at back to the search part of it, again, we have the option to use and build our own search using the concept search. So let's perhaps look at a specific topic here for clinicaltrials.gov, looking for specific trials. So if we're looking at perhaps pediatric obesity, we might be unclear as to whether there's a value for that in the ontology. There is a suggestion, and so again we'll take that suggestion and we'll look for that specifically within the brief summary or the title area. So we're specifying a range of ontology terms for pediatric obesity within specific parts of the record, and then we're adding a separate and second search component to a different part of the trial information. This time and we'd be looking for that within the eligibility criteria, within the inclusion component specifically of the eligibility criteria. And we'll run that on a broad set of records. So we'll go back a few additional years to Jan 2018. And so you'll see now that we have some results here that may be of interest in and around studies for pediatric obesity, with young adults mentioned within the eligibility criteria. Now, maybe that's not sufficient and we haven't found enough of what we want. We want to expand the search to look for perhaps the term children within the eligibility criteria as well. And so because of the way that we've indexed the data, we can tune and tweak and change these criteria and rerun these very, very quickly. We're now seeing 98 results coming through because we've slackened the criteria by adding another alternative term in for the eligibility criteria. And this allows us to see far more results. Again, we can click on the title of the document and get taken through to clinicaltrials.gov to see the record. And there you'll see the external record. We can also see where maybe key terms that we'd be looking for might be within that same content, but in a marked up and highlighted cached version. And on the left-hand side, once again, we've got the option of looking through some of the data that we found and filtering on the findings live. So here we've got the organization involved, and we've also got the year. So I might be looking for the most recent records of interest. And so I quickly get to see the 2021 records that I'm interested in. Another way, as we mentioned before, to use the tool is to select a smart query. Let's look at a COVID example. So we're now looking for trials related to COVID treatments. So if I put in, let's say, tocilizumab once again. Again, I select the ontology version. And here a series of defaults have been created with this quite rich set of parameters for a pre-built query called drug trials. And now I'm able to quickly find SARS-CoV-19 related information featuring tocilizumab. I had a quick one result there. If I hit the refresh button, I see another 13 documents are added to my results set. And again, I get some profiling variables on the left-hand side, which allow me to filter and actively find the components that I'm looking for. Another piece that we talked briefly about earlier on the webinar was the ability to take one set of logic and apply it to different data sets with quite different structures. So here you'll see that we're running these queries on clinicaltrials.gov, but we have some queries designed for some of the other sources. So here's a mode of action query originally written for the Medline data source, but we can take that query, that mode of action query, and run it on clinicaltrials.gov and see if we can find relationships between the drug that we've entered and some of the mode of action targets that we might find. So here, by running that query, we've found 78 documents of interest. And if I switch to the results table, what you can see is that the drug that we've entered has a variety of mode of action mentions within clinicaltrials.gov that may be of interest. So here we've got genes and proteins relationship with IL-6, which would make sense. But we also see other results coming through that we may want to drill in more deeply. If we go up to the target list, so rather than going through and looking for all the different options, I get a frequency count here under target. And so because the scientific mode of action is related to IL-6, that's the biggest result. But you can see here some other interesting results coming through. And sometimes there's some interesting information in the long tail, as it were. Further up towards the top, you'll see a common topic in and around COVID is cytokine. And so if I select that, I can now zoom in on cytokine-related mode of action results for tocilizumab within the clinicaltrials.gov database. Jane, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thanks very much. So we've gone into detail on the sort of value, the sort of utility of FDA drug labels, clinicaltrials.gov. We wanted to just touch on another couple of the content sources that we know nearly all of our clients are using and getting value from. So patents. Obviously, if you're familiar with patents, they're really valuable for getting the first mention of much of the kind of critical data around novel drug targets, novel chemistry, novel disease areas, formulations, components, a whole range of different things that relate to pharma and biotech products, product development, packaging, and so forth. And getting early access to this information provides a real competitive edge. But if you're familiar with patents, you know that they are notoriously hard to search. They're long documents, they use obtuse language. And the example here from Pfizer they looked at how long it took for manual search and to find the potential drug targets for just 3 therapeutic areas of interest took 50 days. So they've built a workflow that incorporates natural language processing to extract 4 key areas from patents. They want to look at the drug target, they want to look at the disease indication, the invention type, so whether it's a small molecule or biologic, and then critically the organization. And as we've mentioned before, the content in our cloud is updated weekly across, and here you can see we're looking across 3 different sources of full text patents. You can see that the recall is tenfold what a manual search can bring back, but the precision is equally as good. And what Pfizer have done is loaded the information into a database, internal database, with visual interfaces to make the information much more accessible to end users through the sort of dashboards that Hal's been showing. So this integrated reduces the resources that Pfizer needs. And again, it's a way of being able to say that content is ready to go. The queries can be built into workflows, so it's delivering up-to-date information direct to the teams who need it. And just a snapshot of the sort of dashboards that Pfizer have built. Don't worry too much about the detail, but on the left-hand side, you've got a dashboard for a particular disease. It's for fibrosis, and you can see, information on the relevance, information on the specific targets, information on the organizations who are looking at fibrosis, and then on the right, a very similar dashboard just for one of the drug targets as well. So again, really easy to consume, easy to understand, a landscape of intelligence that's very easy to work with. And there's a quote from one of the champions of using natural language processing at Pfizer, from Matt Crawford. And you can see he's saying that the results, a tenfold increase in the number of patents analyzed, reduces the amount of work required, so that the people who are working on patents have time to think about the analysis as opposed to spending so much time on the search. And in essence, again, that real value for effective research rapidly. And then the last one, again, looking across literature sources. So we mentioned briefly at the start that what we can do with natural language processing is you don't need to search just one source. You can integrate and federate and search more than one sources. So this was from, again, a webinar presented by Sanofi, who wanted to pull together a landscape of information that would help them understand rare disease. Particularly trying to see if any of the drugs that they have or other drugs could be used to as therapies for rare disease. So drug repurposing tends to be traditionally a sort of an ad hoc, almost serendipitous approach. What they want to do is provide a very systematic way of understanding target and indication links. So they used NLP to look within Medline. You can see highlighted in the center, Medline, OMIM, the Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man, and Orphanet. So 3 big textual databases that all have content around genes, targets, pathways, and rare disease particularly. But they wanted not just to be able to link directly from a protein target to a disease, but also build indirect links. And again, that's where NLP across these NLP-enabled data sources, you can then do a query that's linking A to B and a query linking B to C, and then join that information. So you can see in the little schematic at the center, they were looking for links from target disease following things like pathways or cell types or biological processes. So again, really able to build a very rich landscape. And again, taking that data, having found the data, structured the data using NLP, they can then export it, as Hal was showing in the demo, here in a workflow into what they called a knowledge-based rare view, which enables them also to provide this visual representation of linkages from the rare diseases to causal genes and pathways and drugs. And you can see the quote on the right, text mining with network approaches allowed the team to quickly identify new indication opportunities from target disease pairs. So I skipped through those use cases, and again, it's the sort of thing that if you're interested, we can provide stories around any of the use cases. That bench to bedside slide we presented. We can really, help you fill in how that rich content with the technology can really help you solve your challenges. How?
Thanks, Jane. So in summary, we've talked about a variety of topics in relation to many different use cases across the bench-to-bedside paradigm. So in summary, there are a multitude of sources available externally to answer these different questions. And sources like clinicaltrials.gov and Medline may be familiar to all of us, and we may use them every day, but that would also mean that we know that they can be a challenge to really get the right value from, and for certain questions especially can produce quite noisy and unuseful results. And so applying natural language processing along with the fast indexes that we apply to the data allows us to get more value from them. And we have built essentially a robust extraction and indexing process. And I see a question actually from John on the side here, and I think that this point talks to that. That we can access the data, pull that data and index it, creating a temporary cached copy that really allows us to speed up our NLP processes in order to get the results more quickly. But those data sources, those extractions are done regularly so that the data is up to date. The fourth bullet then is around data scientists and users of the data for things like modeling, machine learning, who want to develop things like Python and other pipelines, can take advantage of these data sources, but also of the speed of the NLP on top to get the right extractions to power those use cases, both for sandbox and experimentation type scenarios, as well as for production pipelines. And finally, business and scientist users can access these sources using the Insights Hub or similar tools to do interactive search using NLP components that Jane showed in that blocks chart right at the beginning. Take advantage of the power of some of those components using the interactive search builder, and then use dashboarding to do things like landscaping and getting a broad sense of what the data contains in order to find and extract what's needed. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended. I'll just double check any more questions. Do we have any more here? Just while we're going through the questions, if you want more information, you can visit IQVIA.com and search NLP, and you'll find a whole series of different pieces of content, blogs, etc. And feel free to reach out to us.